So welcome, good evening everybody to the Operations Committee of the Portland Board of Public Education. Today is Thursday, October 1st at 5:30, and take a roll call. Board Member Figdor?
Here.
Board Member Burke?
Here.
Okay, and we have our Operations Director joining us this evening, as well as Superintendent Botana and our Chair, Roberto Rodriguez. So with that, we have on our agenda approval of September 3rd meeting minutes, and we're going to defer that to our next meeting. Is there a motion to defer to the next meeting? Okay, Ms. Figdor, seconded by Mr. Burke. Any questions? Okay. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. And I will turn it over. We have on the agenda, it says consideration action to authorize the school board chair to enter into a contract with Scott Simmons Architects in an amount not to exceed $300,000 for architect and engineering services for Americans with Disability Act related improvements to be funded under the State of Maine State School Revolving Renovation Fund. Since we don't do moving, I think this is just more of an agenda item to inform committee members, so I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
This is just to discuss an item that is going to be up in front of the board for authorization and to approve entering into this contract. So if you look at that item, there are a number of attachments with that. We have, as you know, received funding from the state to, as part of the revolving loan fund, to make some Americans with Disabilities Act improvements in a number of our schools. And so in order to be able to act on those, we need to first do the engineering study that will get us all of the plans in place for us to be able to contract that out. So that process has been in motion. We received the funding last year, almost, I believe it was in January that we found out. With COVID, we asked for an extension on the accessing of the funds, which we received, and so we are now, we put out a bid for, not a bid, we went out to qualified contractors to do our architect and engineering study, and staff reviewed the three different proposals that came in and determined that Scott Simmons Architects would be the best choice, and so that's what we are bringing to the board. Mr. Stilfen can give more details on the specifics of the plan, as well as the process that they followed. And in your packet, I'm sorry, there is a document that provides the scope of work for the different projects. So that gives you an idea of the total cost of each of these projects and what will be done as a result of this. And then that's what the engineering firm is going to lay out for us to then be able to bid out.
Thank you. Mr. Stilfen, do you have anything you'd like to add to what the superintendent said?
That was a good summary, Javier. I'll only add that we not only looked at the presentation or the prosper that they made in documentation, we interviewed each firm on Zoom for an hour and a half and on separate days. And through that interview, we had a rubric, a scoring rubric that we used to that reflected the needs and experience. So it was a qualification based, not a, as Javier spoke to, a difference from an RFP for a proposal to bid. It was for a qualification based, which was required from the DOE in the structure of the revolving fund process. So what we did to get there is we had a rubrics scoring, and I think, Emily, you've been involved with us when we chose architects, so it was very similar to that process, and that was a good experience, I think, for our team internally. This team consisted of myself, Doug, and our maintenance supervisor, Mr. Dave Morrill. So it was a good process, very professional architects, firms locally, WBRC, Scott Simon, and CHA were the three firms that put forward an interest in the projects. So the scope, as is defined in the document in your packet, fits the applications that we put forward to the state for consideration of the SRRF loan. We also took the opportunity to collect ADA CIP projects that had been funded from the past, and the opportunity with the architect engineering firm to look at those issues as well. So we're combining our CIP money, the CIP projects, into this in combination with the SRRF money. So we cast as broad a net as we could to collect the most pressing ADA issues that we have in our schools. And we're really excited about working with Scott Simon. His proposal right off the bat indicated that his approach would take a two-team approach from his staff. So that was one of the differentiators from the other two firms. The specifics and the time frame to do the projects with Scott Simon on board, I think it was some of these extensions that Javier's talked to, not only for us, but others in the state who have received some of this loan and funding because of the pandemic. There's a realization that with this extension, we really should and will do the corrections that we've outlined for ADA in the schools.
I think it might be important for people to understand this, that I mentioned that this is funded through the revolving loan fund, but Steve just mentioned the fact that we are actually combining that with some city CIP funds that had already been allocated and committed, and we're packaging it all as one. So where we have roughly $2 million in the revolving loan fund, we have about $1 million in city CIP funds that are also being lumped together. And so this is like a $3 million project. And Steve, I know that the Lincoln improvements, those are funded out of the district CIP. What else is funded out of the district CIP?
I'll have to look at the document.
I think it's, I see it here. It's
at the bottom of that document, Harvey. I know the Lincoln entrance was a bigger one. The corridor widths, I think, in King also. Without scrubbing that list in my head, I can't pull them all together.
I think it's Lincoln and then facility, the district ADA compliance issues.
And that speaks to corridor widths, bathrooms, fixtures, door handles. That's all identified and extracted from the Sebago Technics assessment. So, yeah,
I think those are the two. They're the ones that were in FY19 CIP, because everything else is in FY21 FY21 CIP. So,
great, thank you.
I'd just like to say for this, what we'll do now, after, if the school board approves, of course, we'll meet with Scott Simon. He's giving us a proposal on his costs. We'll negotiate to the state architectural BREM, Bureau of Real Estate Management, and apply the specific dollar amounts or costs or fees as the scope is indicated. So if it's new construction, if it's renovation, there's different fees, and we're going to do a scrub down of what they have put forward and will be under or near or under the 300,000. That's what we will negotiate once approved.
Great, thank you. Opening it up to Ms. Figdor or Mr. Burke. Do either of you have any questions regarding this item? Okay. Mr. Burke?
I'll just make the comment that there's no flags for me in what I'm reviewing here in terms of your process, and known by reputation and outcomes Scott Simons to be an excellent architecture firm. They've done the library, Casco Bay Terminal, Wayne Fleet's Lower School, and not that it's the same project scope, but excellent reputation and quality of work. So all stands up for me.
Great, thank you. And I believe Chair Rodriguez has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just timeline-wise, so for October 6th, you want this to be a first read, or do you need this to be authorized by then?
We want to get it authorized. I think the memo points out the fact that technically the board does not need to actually approve this, but when we talked it through with our attorneys, given the size of the award, they thought it would be that I definitely needed to bring it to the board just for visibility. And then, since we were doing that, they thought it might make sense to just have the board authorize the chair to sign the agreement. We've had some of these contested in the past, so I think it's just a measure of transparency and security to do that.
Definitely. I haven't taken the time to read the memo yet, so I'll do that tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. Any further questions? Okay, moving on, and we will be moving to discussing the superintendent's plan for returning pre-K through 5 grade students to full-time in-person instruction. And I'll turn it over to the superintendent on that item.
So I don't have a specific plan for doing this today. We finalized and added the memorandum that is also going to be going out tonight with the board's agenda for Tuesday, that outlines the process that we've gone through in making the decision to stay in our hybrid mode for the immediate future. And so I don't expect, since we added this maybe an hour before the meeting, I don't expect that you've had a chance to read it. And if you did, it was speed reading. So I thought it would be helpful to just sort of walk through that memo briefly, just so that you understand the basic thrust of the decision-making process. Does that?
That works. Thank you.
Okay. So does everybody have the memo? Yeah. Okay. So probably the summary is at the beginning. So it tells you that there were multiple things that we looked at. So we looked at the health data, all of which is continuing to be positive. So, on the health data alone, there wasn't a rationale for, not returning students to school. The biggest barrier that we have is the physical distancing requirements. The fact that currently for meals at the elementary level, you need to have 6 feet of distance between students when they are unmasked. That just makes it challenging to be able to do in any of our settings, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We continue to be concerned about some of the staffing implications of coming back to school full time, and we'll talk about those as well. And, we feel good about how implementation has gone so far. with the engagement level of students, particularly in the elementary and middle school. For hybrid, we feel that, both in person and on remote days, that students have been participating at high levels. And so, we think that that is, again, a good indicator. It doesn't, tell us that things are really not working for students on those remote days. And so we felt comfortable using that as a reason to remain. We also are still challenged with making those remote days everything that we need them to be. And so remaining in this hybrid mode allows us to continue to refine what happens during remote days, which we think is important, looking ahead to the possibility of being all remote at some point, and ideally having worked through how to make those remote instructional days as meaningful as they can be for students. So, and then the final thing is that as we've talked to our leaders, as we've listened to input from our staff, people are feeling good with how things have started out. Generally, they feel that we're able to maintain our safety and health requirements in place, and where some folks might have been super concerned coming in, they're feeling more that it's manageable to do this right now. And so sort of an intangible of this would be disrupting that after a relatively short period of time. And one of the reasons why I decided that it made sense for us to continue to be in hybrid mode for the time being. So, Ms. Figdor, I see your hand is up.
I wanted to just hold questions if you don't mind for a second. I just want him to finish the presentation, if that's okay.
Well, so I'm going to go into the details of each of the data points. So if you have a sort of a generic question, it might make sense to take that now, and then I'm going to go through the at a high level now.
Okay. All right. Ms. Figdor?
I can hold my question. My question was with respect to the the determination that it's not the status of the virus that is driving this decision. So I had some follow-up on that, but maybe you're going to get to that.
So that's where I'm going to start. So as you can see, I guess this is page 2 in the memo, it starts with the health data for the county, and you can see that we continue to be green, and that's positive. So that means that according to that indicator, we are able to bring all students back to school every day, provided that we are able to maintain all of those other safety requirements, which is where the challenge begins. We are obviously aware and concerned of the fact that we're now surrounded by 2 counties that are in yellow, and that Androscoggin is also on watch. So it's being reevaluated weekly in the same way that York County was. And so I think that is, a cause for concern. I think we've also seen the numbers rise, at the state level. So we know that things are trending in that other direction. They're still extremely good, compared to the rest of the country. But it is somewhat of a concern for us. So we've looked at that. You can see there the numbers of the case counts for Cumberland, and you can see that it's slightly up. It's inching upward. It has been, through all 3 of those iterations of the state list. So just trending in that direction. And as we've done before, you can see the by zip numbers for the city of Portland and the islands by zip code. We are fortunate that we have not yet had any positive cases. We know, and you do as well, that other school districts around us have had positive cases. So we've been fortunate not to have any at this point. So that is not, that's not a factor for us specifically at this point. Still on the health, one area of concern for us is the fact that we are struggling with our symptoms check. We have, been able to get it out, and we still have a significant number of people who are not completing it on a daily basis, and particularly on a timely basis. And so our overall response rate is about 60%. And so that means that 40% of the kids are coming to school without that and having to be triaged as they come to school in the morning. And so that takes a significant amount of time. If we were to double the number of students in school, that would, in all likelihood, double the amount of time that would go into that. So that is, a significant number of students that would not be in class, and, that would be taking up the time for both our nursing staff and administrators to be able to tend to other issues. So that is an area of concern around health.
Javier, can you just talk briefly about what the current symptom screening is, so people are aware?
Yeah, so I think you've seen it before. It's a single question email or text that goes out that asks families if they've answered if they've given the symptoms check, and if they've answered negatively all of the questions. And so basically the correct answer is a simple yes. And if people, answer yes, then, that student is considered to have complied with the symptoms check. So we are still working on getting a number of people that have not, for whom we don't have email addresses and have not opted into receiving the text message. We did another round of that last week to try to get people to do that. We now have identified at the individual level who has not opted in or has not or does not have an email. So we can get them either way. We know that some of the people that have opted out because they prefer to get the email. And from our perspective, it's one or the other. It doesn't really matter. If you do it one way or the other, it's the same question. So we just need everybody to get it, and then everybody to do it, ideally as early as possible, so that when the student arrives at school, we will already have a printed list that says, all of these kids, here's all the kids in the school, here's the ones that have done it, here's the ones that have not done it.
Great, thank you. Going to Ms. Victor?
Yeah, just for Board Member Thompson, as a parent, I can say, I get both the texts and the emails at 6 a.m. and it takes me maybe half a second to respond for both of my kids. So once people are, set up and understand the need to complete it as early as possible, it's very easy to do. It comes right to you. It's very straightforward. You just I just get in the habit, getting it done. So it is from the perspective of a parent, who is set up in the system, it is very straightforward.
it's the setup that's a challenge for us to be able to reach everybody. So.
Thank you. I'm speaking from somebody that does it every single morning to go into work. Going to Board Member Burke.
I'm just curious what this preferred timing for submission is, because that hasn't been communicated previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ideally 45 minutes before the start of school. That's what we, that's the, I was talking to one of our nurses today. They have about a 30% compliance rate 45 minutes before, and then it jumps up later in the day. But later in the day doesn't really help them as much, because that's, those are when they print their lists and they get ready for, to go out and meet the kids that haven't completed it. So ideally 45 minutes ahead of time. Which for our early start schools is pretty early.
Sure. Yeah. Like Victor said, it's not hard to do, but for myself, I wait until my children are up and I talk to my child about the symptoms so he's aware of what's happening. So there's a delay between me being able to do it and me conducting it in that way. So I was curious.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chair Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my camera's off. I'm cooking and eating, so to spare you guys that. Javier, I'm just wondering on our end, when we send them out, how many of our outreach are bouncing back, which would indicate that we have like not valid contact information, and how, number one, challenging, and number two, what are our efforts to try to update that data? And I'm also thinking about parents that might have inconsistent phone numbers, whether they're using like track phones and other things like that. So just to speak of number one of those challenges, which are, we just want to acknowledge them, of course, and the efforts that we're doing to try to mitigate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. My most recent recollection was that of 8,000 emails that 8,000 folks in our database, that's staff and students. It's closer to 9,000 because that's also secondary addresses and things along those lines, that about 4,000 of them are not opted in to the text. There's 1,000, so there's about 4,000 that are opted in, 4,000 that aren't. There's about 1,000 for whom we only have emails. And then, we just did another, sort of push of the opt-in last week, and we captured another group. I have a report somewhere in my email that so it ranges from 170, almost 180 people that are pending at Portland High School to 30 at LISEP. So that's the range. There's a significantly larger number at the high school that have not opted in. So we also have it broken down by race and ethnicity, by EL status, and so on. Altogether, right now, we have about 1,100, so 1,052 students whose parents, guardians are not opted into receiving the SMS message, and who are also not receiving and opening emails sent through School Messenger. So it's about 1,000 people now that we do not have access to, or 1,000 households. So,
Can I answer your question, Chair?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's not. I'm just wondering, kind of my when I hear that number, that sounds like a big number.
Yeah, and we are sending a flyer home, also reviewing the instructions for doing the daily COVID symptoms check and the screening checks checklist, and we're sending those in the language of the students, just to sort of put a number on it. About half of the folks that we do not have, of the 1,000, 500 are current EL, another 200 are exited EL. So that's about 60% of the population that is not getting the message on a daily basis. So we are focusing on that. We're engaged with our multilingual center. They're doing that. There's also a school targeted robocall in the language of those students that's being developed right now to go to those students. So we are trying to get those numbers to decrease. We always have churn on that, as people get new phone numbers and, don't update their records and things along those lines. But, we were down to 1,000 from what was, significantly higher before. And, it still is, so it's a combination of 1,000 people who aren't getting it and, a number of people who are not completing it on a daily basis.
I appreciate that. I guess the only other follow-up to that is I wonder how it made me think of what our attendance has been so far in our school.
So that's one of the things that we will be covering in a minute when we get to that.
And how those lists, obviously connect with each other. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the next item in the memo is around the facilities data. And I think this is, as I mentioned earlier, the most, the biggest challenge that we face. So at the elementary level, we have right now, if all of our, if we went to all students coming back, 3 of our schools would be able to manage, 3 out of 9 of our elementary schools would be able to manage the enrollment, even considering the challenge at mealtime. If we do come back and we then have a large number of students from remote academy come back, we have none of our schools that would be able to accommodate all of those students if they came back. So those 3 schools that we currently have that would be able to accommodate would not if we had all of the remote academy students return to school. So I think that's our biggest challenge at the elementary level, is really being able to do that. And you'll see when you read the memo that there is mention of the fact that as long as that 6-foot distancing during meals is in place, it's hard to envision any scenario under which we would be able to come back to full in-person learning for students until that changes. So, which, at this point, there's no reason to believe it will change, but things have changed along the way with everything COVID related. So we also have in there the high school classroom capacity. And I know that this is a issue that is controversial, that there are, many parents in grades 10 through 12 who are dissatisfied with the fact that we are fully remote for those grade levels. And so I'm sure you will hear from them tonight and at the board meeting next week. But we have significant challenges keeping our 6 feet distancing. So I'm not tight with these details. We will be sharing those in detail at the meeting on Monday and talking about the real concerns that are space issues at the high school present. So that's it really in terms of the facilities data. I don't know if you have any questions about those. Okay. So staffing is also what we have in here are a couple of different ways that we looked at it. One was looking at the number of people who are currently under some form of flexible work arrangements, and then how many of those individuals would be potentially, in a situation where they would have to change their decision if we were to change ours. So if we were to go back to in-person instruction, right now we have 27 people that are in what we've labeled as level B and level C. And so those are that our staff anticipates some difficulty with them returning to 5 days a week on site. And those where we have very significant concerns about that. So those are we expect additional accommodation requests from those individuals that would, require us to, potentially have to fill positions so people could, get leaves or resign, which would push us in that direction. The remote academy right now has another 28 people who are in those categories. So again, if we were to be in a situation where people return from remote academy to in-person learning, there are a significant number of those positions that would need to transfer back to in-person learning at schools. And so those would again be added in. So, altogether the universe is somewhere in the neighborhood of, over 50 people that we would need to figure out whether we would be able to meet their accommodations or not. So that's one area of concern. And then the other one is around our ability to find substitutes if we wind up with, worse attendance. Generally, our teacher attendance runs in the 90 to 95%, on a weekly basis. And as you can see, we've done better than that almost across the board. Really proud of how our teachers have stepped up and been with us for these first 2 weeks. So we've had, a relatively small number of unfilled vacancies, with or sub needs, because we've had really, really good attendance. But as you can, if you read through the information below that, there, if we go to 90% or 95% across the board, it will become increasingly taxing to be able to fill all of those substitute positions. Even where you see the unfilled, that's, after the existing in-person subs, the full-time subs that we've hired have been put in place and are covering classes. Those are still the numbers that remain unstaffed of our substitute. So, we also anticipate that if we were to return to in-person learning, we would need to have some additional staff in place, both sort of full-time substitute positions, as well as more support staff to be able to help with maintaining protocols for larger number of kids, doing supporting the health screening process and things along those lines. So our estimate is that would be another $365,000 in staffing costs that we would need to absorb once the CRF funding runs its course at the end of December. So that would be added to the roughly $4 million that we're already concerned about being able to sustain past December 31st. So that's on the staffing front. Do you have any questions on that issue, on those issues? Okay.
Questions?
Are we going to go over this again Tuesday?
Yeah, and we'll do a PowerPoint presentation. This is the memo, but it'll be more. A more detailed. Aaron will be doing that, and so, for example, like when we just talked about some of the space issues at the high school and so on, he's been working closely with the principals on that issue, so he has more details than I do.
Okay.
So our attendance. This is, as I mentioned earlier, the way that we've looked at this is, our attendance is really solid for both our in-person days and our remote days. So from the standpoint where we would look at are we completely losing kids on remote days? There's no evidence of that at the elementary level. We are, clearly not doing very well with learning center attendance for students in 10th through 12th grade. So it's improved. It's improved some, but it's not where we want it to be. So I think that there is definitely room for us to prioritize making sure that we're actually having kids in school during that learning center time, because right now it's small numbers. We are just getting it launched. We are seeing progress being made, but it's not where we want it to be. So that's the attendance. I see hands.
Mr. Burke's hand might have been up before mine.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Oh, okay. Javier, I'm just curious how we're approaching making learning relevant and meaningful to our 10th to 12th graders right now, and looking at that as a driver for engagement and involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can see that the attendance during their learning time is really good. So, they are definitely, attending and engaged. To the extent that we also think that in-person learning is important and valuable, that's the part that we're not meeting. But you can see that even on Wednesdays, their check-in times are close to, well, I mean, they're actually better than they are on Monday through Thursday for classes. So and these numbers, the 95% attendance rate, that's generally a little bit better than what it would be for in-person learning in a normal year. But again, this is just the first couple of weeks, and I think that it's reasonable to expect that that over time this would trail off, because it does every year.
Is that Mr. Burke? Ms. Figdor?
My question is, with respect to the learning centers, I'm hearing from parents that that the parents haven't heard anything about the learning centers. These are parents of Portland High, and I'm wondering, I hear you saying that we're working to get attendance up, and I'm wondering, have we fully rolled out the learning centers? And then my second question, and these questions too can be answered more at the board meeting on Tuesday. Yeah. But with respect to advisories, I'm hearing from Portland High parents that their advisories aren't necessarily in person. I'm wondering what the policy is on that, and if I understand some of the staff who are advisors aren't necessarily able to be in person. I'm just wondering how, are we making an effort to have students come in for advisory and have that time together? Just cognizant of the need for high school students to have that social time together.
Yeah. So let's talk more about it on Tuesday, because that will have Aaron, who's been working with high schools on that. I know at this point that Portland High is the one that does not have the in-person advisory. Both Casco and Deering do at this point. So that is an issue that we are working through.
All set, Ms. Victor. I guess I would ask Superintendent, has there been a survey sent out or any kind of memo to the high school parents asking them what would help increase?
There is, I just came, as I mentioned, from a meeting with a group of parents and the high school principals and Aaron. And, so I know from that conversation that there is a survey going out to high school students, staff, and parents next week to get a sense for how things are going and what can be done to make things better.
Wonderful. Thank you. Want to move on?
Okay, and then the last sort of set of data points are really where we went to our principals as the leaders of the buildings and asked them where they thought we should go. And at this point, I can say that it was unanimous that everybody wanted us to stay hybrid for the time being. They're obviously concerned about some of those things that I talked about, particularly about the scheduling of meal times and all the upheaval that would cause at this point, and just feeling like we're just getting our bearings now on how to run school with half of the kids, and to increase that to twice as many kids every day. Just they feel that it would be very significant. It would be a very significant upheaval for them at this point. So I think that is they've echoed some of those things that I've highlighted as we walk through this around the nursing, the symptoms check, and the ability to provide the adequate follow-up to those. I think those are the kinds of things that they're concerned about, along with things like lost instructional time, because we are spending so much time trying to figure out how to break up classes to have them eat their snacks and lunch, and that we would that they would lose a ton of time that is instructional time, as well as having to have kids wait until they're screened before they're able to go to their classes and things like that. So I think that was from the principal's perspective. And then similar issues from the nurses. I think they're also concerned. We have isolation spaces in our buildings, which we feel comfortable are set up for just what they need to be, which is to take somebody who's symptomatic and hold them there until somebody can come and pick them up. But those spaces are for 2 or 3 kids at the most. And, for us to double the number of kids in schools, could potentially tax our ability to do that. Sometimes parents are not just available to come and pick up kids when we call them. And as you saw earlier, even though we have not had any positive cases, we have had kids with symptoms that have come in that have had to go for testing, and kids that have been subsequently quarantined and things along those lines. So that's where those students would actually go into those isolation spaces, and it could prove to be challenging. So I think that those are the concerns that that our nursing staff have expressed. So, basically my direction at this point was to, have us stay in hybrid, to do that through the end of the trimester. We would continue to look at different options for coming back. We need to figure out what's our timeline for finding out from people whether they are interested in returning to in-person learning from remote academy. A number of people went into remote academy thinking that they just wanted to see if things would actually hold, or if we would be, if we would be able to deliver in-person instruction. And so we know that there's a significant number of people who could come back at that point. And so that is, a first order of business for us, because before we realize, as you saw earlier, that, right now we could do 3 out of our 9 schools could accommodate their current population, but, none of them could if all of the kids came back from remote academy. So, it's that's going to be a challenge for us. We also, have seen, as you have as well, people suggesting that we lengthen the school day and that we consider making Wednesday instructional day. We are looking at those 2 options. They, of course, as everything does in this context, they all have their cons as well. And so, the lengthening of the school day wreaks havoc in our transportation, particularly for our special education students. It pushes the middle school day to a pretty late ending, and pushes our special ed high school transportation to a really late start and a really late ending. We're looking at Wednesday. Right now, Wednesday is our deep cleaning day. That's something that we feel is helpful. Every district in the region has one of those days built into their schedule, and so that we would lose that. But again, we are cognizant of the fact that that we are that we have a shorter day, and the kids are only in school for a couple of days. So it is something that we will continue to look at. We would also lose some of the planning time that is associated with that, as well as the ability to do some of the intervention work that is just now starting to pick up.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions, but I'll turn to Chair Rodriguez first.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about the number of students that we ended up transporting. I know that we were asking families that were able to do it without the district's transportation to do so. And I'm assuming also that we've looked at whether that number is small enough to create any kind of leadway in using our transportation or not. So did we hit the expectations that we had on the number of students?
I don't have the exact numbers, but transportation has picked up significantly from the first week where people were very but that is that also happens during a regular year. Parents are taking their kids to school the first couple of weeks, and then after that they start relying on the. I see a smirk there. Does that ring a bell? Or
my kid doesn't let me get close to the school anymore. I got it, Dad, go.
That happens as well. Yeah. So I think that over time it will continue to pick up. It would be very challenging for us to sort of undo any of our routes, because we have some routes that don't have large numbers in them. But they couldn't pick up another route without making the route too lengthy. So.
That was my only question. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. So I have a few questions, Superintendent. One is, I think you've covered that a little bit about the longer in-person days, the possibility of weighing that. There's also been some concerns about the workload on non-school days, that there's the perception or the people feeling as though the workload on that Wednesday is much heavier than the other days. Could you address that?
That the workload on Wednesday is heavier, or that the workload on Wednesday is
on non-school day?
Yeah, on the so I think that, I mentioned that earlier, that one of the other, reasons that we think that staying hybrid is helpful for us is we've heard those concerns from parents about the level of of work that's being expected of students during those remote days, and as we look to potentially be remote for more than just 2 days a week. So in a situation where we would be full remote, trying to work through some of those issues and trying to figure out what's the right workload for those days, and that's an important part of what we need to. So when we talk about this on Tuesday, we'll talk about some of the concerns that we have about what is going on those days. We're not as consistent as we hoped that we would be, and the level of, sort of the level of work that's being expected of students and the kind of work that's being expected of students is not where we want it to be. So that's an area that we absolutely have room for improvement.
I just have a couple of quick questions before I go to my colleagues. The cost of care concerns, working parents remaining in the hybrid. I know there's been a lot of concerns around that, and our partnerships with outside entities and the mixing of students that don't have the school day together and they end up together. So could you talk a little bit about our partnerships? And I know it's obviously not completely something we can solve for the cost of care, but it is a large issue for working parents. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty robust set of community partnerships, as you know, and I think I don't have that at my fingertips, but we are pretty close to fully subscribed in most of those partnerships. We are looking to continue to engage with new ones and and increase those, as well as trying to do some thinking about different ways that we might be able to use some of the new CRF funding that just came in to be able to sustain, to support families engaging other forms of care during those times. So we're looking at those options. Not a perfect situation by any stretch of the imagination, but that is, we still have a handful of slots for Boys and Girls Club and rec and things along those lines that are available.
So the funding options that you just alluded to, information getting out to parents about those, how are we doing that?
We don't have them yet, so we don't have anything to communicate. As soon as we have something to communicate, we will.
Okay, I figured you would. And my last question is, there was some questions around other opportunities for education to keep kids engaged and tools available. How are we communicating? Are we communicating that through the various teachers on other opportunities available, or as a district, do we have resources available that we provide?
Well, I mean, so we have those partnerships, and that is designed to be more than just childcare. It's also designed to be educational opportunities. So it's or recreational opportunities and educational opportunities. I think what you're asking is what I was referencing in terms of not having hit the sweet spot with remote days. Where we need to do a better job of giving students meaningful work that they can engage in on those days when they're not in school, and including providing other resources beyond, sort of like the packets of materials that they might have brought from school, after they were in school in person on Monday, but also, being able to direct them to other resources and projects and things along those lines that will keep them engaged and motivated on those remote days. I think that is one of our, that's one of our huge challenges right now, is making those remote days be, meaningful and, full productive days.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, guys, bear with me one. Just have one more, sorry. And there was a parent concern around one of our high schools communicating out already before the board has been updated on notification that they would remain in the current way of education until January. And I was just kind of surprised, I guess, that communication had already gone out to families about that. So
it was people communicate lots of things, and that was something that they should not have done before. It was not decided. We made that decision formally on Monday of this past week. So anything that was communicated the previous weeks was just like where we're leaning or what the data is telling us and all of those things. So it was definitely not for them to communicate to anyone. But we've had a couple of those happen along the way. So
Thank you.
Not ideal, but it happens.
Thank you. Turning to Ms. Figdor.
Yes, and just to maybe emphasize what I hear the superintendent saying in terms of needing more consistency with respect to the experience our students are having on their remote days. I can say that my own kids' experience is very different than what Sarah suggested. My kids have have very, very little work. My kids are in the A cohort, so the last time they were remote was on Tuesday, and my fourth grader at 9:35 told me she was done with her schoolwork for the day. And it's just, it brought me back to the spring where there was, as a working parent, there was, it throws them, again, just speaking as my own experience to help inform what perhaps other parents across the district are experiencing. But it does throw then, my work day into total disarray because it's literally 9:35 and she's done with her schoolwork. So, and I think my middle schooler is also having the experience where she's actually having less work on her remote days than she had when we were remote in the spring. She does have on Wednesdays she does have crew every morning, and then one 30-minute world language class. But again, as a parent, I'm seeing them have a lot less work actually than they had on remote days than they had in the spring.
Great, thank you. Sounds like there's some variance. Mr. Burke?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Superintendent, for already looking at and addressing some common questions that are coming up since this announcement has come out from the district. A little bit different than that nuance of communication coming from the one high school. I do think there's been some inconsistency between end of the trimester or the foreseeable future and some communications that have come from central office. So I just would urge you to I'd pay attention to that because it immediately causes confusion upon folks of which one is it going to be. And of course, we're all looking for certainty that none of us can guarantee, but for what is within your control, I'll just highlight that.
In some places we've said for the foreseeable future as opposed to, at the semester break.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so people just are looking for that clarity. I'd like to offer grace, like we're 2 weeks in. It's crazy what is just what even expected of us. We've tried to deploy every version of school so we could meet every version of need. And it was daunting to me when we approved it and also saw no other way forward. And the change of kind of the panic that was part of the start to a little bit of calm. And now the things that we're talking about, oh, we don't have enough schoolwork versus like, I'm worried about, threats to life. So I'm glad we're at that place. I'm grateful that we haven't had any COVID cases. There's so much that's working from that baseline compared to like our normative perspective of what we're expecting from school. And so that's where I sit. And so when like's being said, just trying to offer our personal experiences, like the 45 to an hour bit of work that's it's worksheet. It's not ideal, but it's been like so sweet and gentle for my child to like reacclimate to school and the patterns and that type of thinking. I'm in a middle class two parent household that has work from home flexibility. Like I've got things that I know not every family has, and I'm not trying to build this around my circumstance, but just trying to offer my perspective. So like that pattern's been working. The school day length has been working for my kids. I hear it's been working for a lot of families, and like your recommendation stands with what I've heard from families, teachers, administrators. Like we've got this pattern going. It's working, quote unquote, in a lot of regards. I know you're going to continue evaluating Wednesdays, and I've said to you during one-to-ones, like it's clear to me that that's like a mental health and emotional day in terms of the rhythm of the week. And I would be a proponent of not stepping on that because it seems to be helping with the overall rhythm of things. So those are some of my reflections. I'm glad to hear you talk about how do we get beyond worksheets to more deeply engaged learning. Absolutely want to get there. We're 2 weeks in. You have my grace. I'm the first person to rail against worksheets. I'm not going to do it right now. And yeah, those are my comments. I don't have questions. So thank you.
No, thank you for your grace. That is something that I've taken to asking people consistently, because we are, it's nobody's sitting around doing nothing. I can guarantee you, I look at my team and just see people that are, like working nonstop. And I know that's true for our teachers as well. So we are continuing to work to try to make the best of what is, not ideal situation.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I'm going to go to Chair Rodriguez, but I also want to just notate that it's 20 minutes of 7. We have an end time of approximately 7. So I want to, we were going to also have public comment this evening. So I want to leave enough time for that. So I will go to Chair Rodriguez.
No, I'm gonna hold back on. It was just a couple other thoughts, but I think they're better for Tuesday night, especially after I get a chance to review them and one a little bit more. Thank you, though.
Okay, all right, thank you. Before we go to public comment, does anyone else have any further questions at this time? Okay, seeing none. So those that we have for participants, if you could raise your hand if you would like to address the operations committee, and if you could state your name and address, and you'd have 3 minutes to address the committee. So I'm going to go.
Chair, do you know how to let people in? You want me to do that?
If you could let them in, that would be wonderful. So I have up Penelope.
Yeah.
Penelope.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much. So Penelope St. Louis, I live at 40 Rosemont Avenue in Portland. I had the pleasure of meeting with Superintendent Botana and the principals, as well as what we call a parent planning committee, to get our grades 10 through 12 back in school. I don't want to sound like a broken record. I know that I spoke with you back in August, and I understood from the communication of the board at that time that folks were very much in favor of developing a plan to safely return grades 10 through 12 back into the classroom as a priority. I'm going to actually, I have not been able to evaluate in detail the memo that came out late this afternoon. And so I may be a bit, a little all over the place with some of the comments and the questions that I've had. And I will promise to be more succinct on Tuesday night. So a couple of comments first. Hybrid model for grades 10 through 12 is a misnomer, and to continue to use that, I think, does a disservice to those grades. They're fully remote. They have been. They have been since the spring. Let's see. I have some questions. I'd like to know at the high school level what the percentage of teachers are that have requested accommodation. I'm not asking for names, I'm not asking for reasons, but I'd like to identify and be discreet about how many high school teachers would need a special accommodation if a 2-week-a-day return to school was introduced. Question: if $365,000 could be raised to hire additional staff, would that resolve the problem of getting our 10th through 12th graders back into the classroom? I'd like to talk about the space distance that was developed, which is masking with a 6-foot space distance. I I know that the school district agreed with the teachers union to do that, but that is not what the CDC guidelines say. And the CDC, and after our meeting earlier this evening, I brought them up. And the CDC guidelines from Maine indicate 3 feet with mask, 6 feet without mask. And so I feel like we are doomed to never returning our children to school, grades 10 through 12, if we continue to impose a 6-foot distance and masks at the same time. So I'd ask a reconsideration of that. I think that would ease the burden that we keep hearing. We can't return these 3 discrete classes to school because of this 6-foot guideline. It is not what the CDC has recommended. The other comment I have on the CDC recommendations, and I mentioned this back in August, that I have had the privilege of talking with folks that have advised the CDC on coming up with guidelines. I spoke with a person last week about that and indicated, am I all crazy about this? Should I forget, talking to the school board members? Is it just me? And the statistics show that students who have contracted COVID have done so outside of the school, be it in social gatherings, be it in sport activities, that tracing has demonstrated that they're not catching COVID in the school itself. Okay, so a couple of more questions.
Penelope, would you like an extension? Because I think we were already over at the 3, but certainly I don't.
Oh gosh, if I could.
Yep. If you'd like to as well, to email the questions to our chair or myself in the superintendent, and we can add those to our FAQs. That would be great as well. So, all right, I feel like all right, so I'll try to be quick. Clearly, we're not doing well at the Learning Center attendance. True, because nobody really knows what the Learning Center is. I don't think it's been adequately described or identified for parents or students. So I want to identify that attending, the superintendent indicated that attendance has been high for remote learners. Yes, but I can tell you attendance is not engagement. My student attends every single day. Is she engaged? No, she's not. So let's see. Will the survey results that are being sent out be separated by categories of parents, students, and staff, or will they be all lumped together? See, Portland High School doesn't really have to deal with meals since they're an open campus. The kids don't stay on the campus for their meals, and so that seems like for Portland High School at least is not a consideration. Nobody has mentioned the increase in substance abuse, suicide thoughts, and attempts, or hunger for these grades 10 through 12 that I know are happening. It's not to say that the school has to address every problem that teens go through, and I understand that, but this social engagement, educational engagement can alleviate some of those substance abuse issues and suicidal thought issues, which really just break my heart. And then it was stated that the biggest challenge is making remote days more engaging. And yet I hear that the biggest challenge is returning kids to in-school learning. So I'm not sure which one it is. I'm going to urge you again, and I'm going to urge you on Tuesday. These 10th through 12th graders are starting to become very resentful of the fact that nobody's listening to them. Nobody cares about them. This remote learning was held up as a panacea to solve all of their problems, and nobody's taking advantage of it. These kids, at least I know 11th grade was a really hard grade. And there's nothing, there's no connection, there's no engagement. Yeah, there's attendance, all right, because these kids want to get back to school. But if you reached out and talked to some of these high schoolers and asked them how they feel about being remote, only grades 10 through 12, they'll say that they feel discriminated against, they feel that they've been treated unequally, and they really just want to get back into the learning environment. So thank you so much. Thank you for the extension. I know this is a difficult process. I appreciate Superintendent Botana and really all of the principals for engaging with some of the parents to talk about these issues. But I feel like we talked about
Indigenous Peoples Day would have a plan to get these kids back in. And now I'm hearing it's not going to be until November 13th before we get these back in. And back in August, I said, let's not wait to plan and then to implement and then to engage. Let's do the planning now so that come October 13th, we can get these kids back to school. We are green. We were green. God help us. We continue to be green, but let these kids get back to school. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any other public comment at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And turning to the committee, is there anything further that you have for questions of the superintendent? Okay.
And I would like to just address that, one of the points that Ms. St. Louis made. I don't know that there is that sort of making remote learning more engaging is the largest problem that we face. It is definitely one of the many large problems that we face. But, I'm very aware of the concerns that Ms. St. Louis and other parents have raised about 10 through 12. I feel terrible about the fact that we are not, measuring up on that front, and we will continue to look for ways to do that. I know, having my own, now college-age student, doing his university, online, that it is, far from the ideal situation. So I am, absolutely, sympathetic and understand the challenge that those students face. Having gone through the process of, trying to get my son into college, I know how incredibly important the junior and senior years are for, all of the different things that that go with, with the preparation and getting into school. So we will continue to work towards that. It's incredibly challenging, as I said, earlier to Mr. Burke's comments. I beg your grace, because these are not things that people are sitting around doing nothing and are going to just sort of, okay, now let's try to figure out how to get the 10th through 12th grade. We are working hard to try to figure out how to do that, and with lots of competing agendas and competing, none of these are choices that are just like, oh yeah, let's do that, because none of them are things that don't have, cons. Everything that we look at has, a couple of pros and a couple of cons. So, I hear your frustration. I know that it's incredibly frustrating, and that it is your kid, and that you're advocating for your kid. I recognize that, and we will continue to work towards that. And, for those areas where we haven't done a good enough job with communication and things along those lines, that's definitely stuff that we need to get better at, and we will continue to do that.
Great, thank you. So with that, about 6:50. I know that Penelope, you're raising your hand again. I guess since nobody else will, real briefly, Penelope, if you have a question, but we need to really cut it off at this point. So if you could submit your questions to the chair and the superintendent, we'd greatly appreciate that. And you can send them to me as well if you'd like, and we can get them out to the board. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. It is 6:52. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Burke, seconded by Ms. Figdor. All those in favor? Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.